Hello, and welcome to Colonel O'Truth's Miniature Issues. In this episode, I'm taking a look back at the project that has dominated most of the last 2 years of my life. A fantasy city built entirely from scratch with cheap materials and simple techniques. This is Undercrag City. I know it's been tricky at times to keep track of where all these buildings are and how they relate to each other. So, here's the city in its entirety. I'd like to take you through some of my favourite parts and take a look back at how this all began. My original intention was to build a walled town for 10mm wargaming. This was to fit my modular table, and so it's made up of blocks 200mm by 200mm. I started by simply plotting things out, and I made a test piece of castle wall. At this point, I did know some of the things I wanted to fit into this project, like the aqueduct for example, but I had no idea how ambitious this was going to get or how long it was going to take. I also could not have guessed how many people would become invested in this project with me and share this journey. I really can't thank you all enough for the support and encouragement you've given me during the last 2 years. Here you can see a key aspect of what was to define this city. I've chosen different levels to build on, it's not all on the flat. Also, this first piece dictates the size of the stones for everything to come. They're pretty small, and I must have drawn, I don't know how many tens of thousands. The colour palette was defined as well here, and the ink wash techniques that you'll now be very familiar with. I was playing with ideas here. If I was to do things differently now, I would have been adding sand for these mosses rather than just ink stains. Later on, of course, I do a lot of that. And so the walls of Undercrag became old, moss-festooned, and slimy. City walls, of course, need towers, and I wanted variety in mine. Here you can see the first one I built, East Watch Tower. And this too defined the style of what was to come, but I made every tower slightly different. More stonework, and the same colour palette. My arched doors and windows. And of course inside the tower, LED lighting. And so the city began to take shape. A key feature is of course the aqueduct, and I wanted this from day one. The aqueduct is the remnant of an older society, so the stonework is slightly different, but the same grey with plenty of green staining. The water was made with acetate sheet, cling wrap, and Mod Podge. I needed it to be good and bulky and to really dominate the city. So I planned it out with strong, straight lines and built it up in layers. Whereas other aspects of the city are a little bit rough and ready and higgledy-piggledy, this is straight as an arrow. The people who built this long ago knew what they were doing. I plotted my stonework rather than just drawing it roughly in. So that everything looked much more even. The aqueduct runs the full length of the model, from the caves to the east wall, where the waterfall cascades out of the city. This was a fun, solid piece to build, although a little bit messy at times. Mod Podge went in over a piece of acetate sheet, and I had my rippled surface. And there's my cling wrap waterfall. This is a technique I developed quite a few years ago when I used to have a blog rather than a YouTube channel. I hadn't done it for a while, but I'm very happy with how it worked out. Every town needs an inn. This is the Gate and Chapel Inn, one of the larger buildings on the ground level of Undercrag City. It sits at the corner of North Street and Southgate Square. This was fun to design and went through several stages. Originally, I was going to figure out how to have stables in there. I was just too crammed for space. I used this black card to build almost every building in the city. The main reason was so that I could build lighting inside, simply cutting out window shapes and putting frosted glass in. The black interior meant that very little was visible through the windows. It has to be said that building lighting into these buildings made the whole project take a lot longer than it would have done otherwise. And here is what became my universal technique. Grey paint, brown ink, and then dry brushing, and picking out details with more ink. It got to the point that I was repeating myself on so many episodes, I was concerned people would lose interest. But it was worth it, I think, for the results. With the leaded windows in, it does look rather nice. And on go the roof tiles. In this case, hundreds of them. It took me 3 hours or more to do this one building. It has to be said, without these higgledy-piggledy roofs, Undercrag wouldn't have the same charm. Worth all the hard work, I think. And window boxes. These also became a characteristic of many of the buildings of the city. And a pub needs a sign. So there's the Gate and Chapel Inn. A welcoming home to many a weary traveller. Further into the city, there's the water wheel. This was a fairly complicated piece. A little bit fiddly, with a lot of planning. I had to start with the riverbed. I had to know where the water was coming from and going to. And there were some fairly precise measurements and mathematics involved in constructing the wheel. Fortunately, this wasn't my first water wheel. Many years ago, I built one for a Wild West town called Leadwood. This used a similar technique, but was much smaller. This is also one of the few times in this project that I used modelling plastic. Whenever I can elsewhere, I've used paper or cardboard or similar cheap and easy to get materials, just to show what's possible without breaking the budget. There was a lot of checking and rechecking. This rusty iron finish, using rust ink, was to find its way into almost every building, at least in the door hinges. Here basswood was used instead of balsa wood for strength and rigidity. It was fiddly and it took a while, but it was so satisfying when it was done. Piece by piece, I built up the scene. Improvising as I went. And finally building everything in to the city itself. Now for the cave districts. Undercrag City extends deep underground, and in fact the original settlers hid in the caves while a storm ravaged the lands above. I learned a lot of lessons building this. I had to work outwards from the back. There was a lot of modification, a lot of rethinking. I started with an underground river and the stone walls. I had to constantly think of what needed to be finished, as I wouldn't be able to get to it later. A lot of clay work here as well. These caves were formed by water, so I needed smooth surfaces, not sharp, craggy ones. Here also I wanted my mysterious green light. And the river had to have depth. Acrylic ink and household varnish. Stalagmites and stalactites went in, and little doors and windows in the rock faces. As I started fitting streets in place, I also built a miniature bridge. This would be followed with a jetty. This was just matchsticks and balsa wood. This tiny piece had to be finished and put in place before I could do the next bit. It all had to be blended together, and I had to consider every angle that it might be viewed from, in case anything was wrong. This meant that every surface, even if it would never be seen, had to be finished properly, just in case. And in it went. There are pink and blue mineral deposits on the walls as well. With the outer walls and details of the caves in place, I started to work inwards towards the centre. I want this to be its own busy little town underground. It has to be said, it frustrates Mrs. O'Truth that so many of these details can now not be seen, or at least not clearly. I built the caves in such a way that it's very hard to see a lot of this stuff. If I had known then what I know now, I would have made sure all of this was much more visible in the end product. But at least it's pretty on film. It worked out rather nicely in the end. And then the roof had to go on. Continuing with the underground details, here's the undergate. A subterranean castle with the coat of arms of Undercrag above the door, and a stained glass window. It's from here that the aqueduct runs out of the mountain. This was another piece that was built up in layers. It's a great way to quickly give the impression of bulk. And I added little soldiers as statues. More of my arches developed on that very first tower. I'm combining my media here, thin card, thicker card, different types of foam. They all look slightly unrelated at this point. It's at times like these you have to remember that with any model, or any piece of art for that matter, there's usually a stage where things don't look very good. It's worth just pushing through and keeping going, safe in the knowledge that you're capable of getting it right. Bit by bit, this started to look right. On went a lid. In went my stained glass. My LEDs. And it was time to start building up the stone again. I have no idea how much red DAS clay I got through in this project, but it was a lot. This piece, like most of the others, was built separately from the rest of the model and added in when it was complete, or close to complete. Working like this, I found was much easier and more convenient than working directly onto the model. And each new piece seemed to inform the next as to what it should be and where it should go. The city grew in my imagination as it grew as a model. My pink and blue mineral washes. And in it went, around the aqueduct. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge everybody who watched the last episode. Our numbers simply went through the roof compared to previous videos. We also gained a lot of new subscribers. So thank you very much for watching and for joining the channel, and I hope you'll continue to enjoy my work. And to those of you who are joining me for the first time, please remember to subscribe, like and share, and leave comments and questions for me. I do answer all of them. Now for the Wizard's Tower. This is a fairly recent piece in contrast to the rest of the city, but I think it bears mentioning again. For one thing, it's 5-sided, so there was some maths involved, and each floor is rotated compared to the one below it. I wanted this to be nice and straight, with good angles and clean lines. It was also important to finish it brightly in white stone, mainly because this black card construction rapidly began resembling some sort of evil tower, like Barad-dûr, and I didn't want that. It also has the jutting out eaves that are common to many of the buildings on the Overcrag. I confess, I wish I'd thought of these eaves long ago. They would have made all of Undercrag City seem just that little bit better, just a little bit more fantastical. Here's my PVA and baking soda technique to make cardboard look like stone. I first used this technique on High Chapel, long before I built this Wizard's Tower. Leaded glass again, just like in the tavern. And a blue light for the top floor, the only blue light in the entire city, a sign that magical things are happening. I finished off the roof areas with the same tiles as the rest of the city, the same material, the same size, and the same colour. This was to tie the tower in. It's clearly different architecturally to everything else, but it's utilised many of the same materials, and that makes sense to me. You can see in the eaves the purple of the cat food packets I've been using throughout this project. And my ubiquitous brown ink. I do get through a lot of that. There have been plenty of times that I've decided to add a tiled roof, knowing full well the amount of work it was creating for me, but also knowing how good the end result would look. At times like these, I just can't let go of the idea. It has to be done, and you just have to knuckle down and get on with it. Little gold touches, just to set this building slightly apart. And in it went. It's a clear contrast to the half hobbit, half Viking houses around it. And it rivals Undercrag Manor for dominance of the landscape. Once again, I'm completely finishing the area around the tower before moving on to neighbouring areas. In combination with the temple nearby, there's a strong mystique about this place. I learned a lot in this project and pushed myself to make things that were a little different. I think I succeeded. There are far too many buildings to cover everything here, but I hope this has been a nice recap for you, or a taster if you're new to this channel. Very soon, we'll be setting out from Undercrag City to Valizia, far in the east. A new project at a different scale, with new materials and techniques. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.